I feel truly lost in this mystery, and I'm disappointed in myself, and I feel like I'm disappointing you, the viewer. Don't you dare put a 9/11 joke in here. Ladies and gentlemen, we got him. And by that I mean, I have absolutely no idea what's going on. I'm very confused. Hello, goblins, and welcome back to another episode of A Goblin Solves It All. This time we're going to be taking on, in the completion of our Agatha Christie trilogy, The A.B.C Murders, a Hercule Poirot mystery. Now, the reason I say it's concluding our Agatha Christie trilogy is not because I never plan on coming back to solve another Agatha Christie book. Are you crazy? I'm having way too much fun. But because I would like you all to recommend your favorite murder mystery in the comments down below that is not by the Queen, just so that, I don't know, I can see if this video format also works for possibly a more modern murder mystery. Also just discover another dope author recommended by the Horde. And even if they're like indie or something like that, all the better, because I feel like people are just kind of down to watch a murder mystery regardless of the author a lot of the time. Let's go ahead and jump on in to this one. The A.B.C Murders, which is pitched as Hercule Poirot sets out on the trail of a serial killer in this beloved classic from the Queen of Mystery. Let us see, Mr. Clever Poirot, just how clever you can be. There's a serial killer on the loose, working his way through the alphabet, and the whole country is in a state of panic. A is for Miss Asher in Andover. B is for Betty Bernard in Bexhill. C is for Sir Carmichael Clark in Churchton. With each murder, the killer is getting more confident, but leaving a trail of deliberate clues to taunt the proud Hercule Poirot might just prove to be the first and fatal mistake. I have many thoughts just based off of that. I thought the A.B.C murders obviously was indicating a serial killer, but I thought it would just be the name. But it's just less corny to me that they're actually being like elevated to the point where I'm getting them in their location and their full name. That's actually really impressive for a serial killer, rather than just walking around the street being like, oh, what's your name? David, I'm on D's. Bam! And it's someone who's taunting Hercule Poirot. That's cool. But let's go ahead and try and establish for the structure of my own videos here what exactly I could possibly solve with the who, what, where, when, and why from just that. So we can continually see my theory develop and pivot as we get into the story. The who is going to be a serial killer. S-K here for a serial killer. What? Kind of the same thing here. Where, that was, he said like Churchill. That sounds like London. I don't know. And then when? Agatha Christie's time. We're not specific yet. And why? I'm going to bring down serial killer once again here for that answer. I am going to go ahead and read the first chunk of this book, come up with my own theories. So let's begin. Y'all, we might have had the most interesting possible, turn for this story that could have happened that makes me both very excited to continue on, but also nervous, ironically, that this specific Agatha Christie book might not be 100% conducive to our formula here. Why will become apparent soon, but I also may have met my match with this one. I also wanted to record this earlier today while the sun was still out, but I ended up taking a lovely nap, so I apologize for the harsh shadow on my whiteboard. I'm trying to figure out the lighting situation here and I've not mastered it yet. I'm excited, thrilled to say this is my first time meeting Poirot's partner, Hastings, who, in not a typical Sherlock and Watson setup, actually apparently lives typically in another continent, South America, and is only coming back to London. I was right on that one to basically do some personal business and catch up with his best buddy, Poirot, who also pretty immediately is excited to potentially solve a murder while Hastings is visiting with him, which I love this dynamic between the two. They reunite, bro down, solve mysteries. What? With, as we established in the murder of Roger Ackroyd's, Poirot's rather flamboyant personality, this is just a lovely combination between the two, because Hastings is also somebody who, in the details here, is the world's in the middle of the depression. They call it the world depression. His wife is trying to manage their ranch, and he's like, I'm gonna go bro down about some murders with my best friend.
Right now is our time to party.
I need a vacation. And I was going to, of course, pay extra attention when these two started talking for the first time to try and pick up what exactly their dynamic was, and I can quite frankly say it's delightful. And that's because Poirot and Hastings are just having the most bizarre conversation right from go, where Hastings is trying to point out the fact that like Poirot's mustache and hair looks better than ever, and Poirot's like, that's because I've reversed the graying. And Hastings is like, I don't understand how that's possible, you crazy son of a bitch, you can't do that. To which Poirot says, oh, you unobservant fool. He actually calls his mind beautiful but uncurious, which I find to be a sick burn, but like a good one between friends. Of course, you just answered your own question. It's scientifically impossible. I've been dyeing my hair. And Hastings has just an over-the-top reaction to this. It's like, you're dyeing your hair? And I wish more authors wrote friends interacting as over the top as Agatha Christie does. I feel like a lot of the times books will be like, these two are best friends, and they'll try to write like tight, hardcore movie dialogue, or it's like, how are you doing? Buh. But when how we hang out with our friends, and I imagine this has been true throughout all of human history, because it's just naturally a part of being human, is rather goofy and over the top. They're weird, and I like that they're weird. We also get what is a clear reference to a book I've already read, The Murder of Roger Ackroyd, so that was fun for me.
I understood that reference.
But what we should know is that apparently Poirot has tried to retire and come out of retirement. We saw that in The Murder of Roger Ackroyd, but now he's officially back in it working with the police, and that is why he's excited to have Hastings visit, because he wants to do basically an old murder mystery, solve it with his buddy. We also see Hastings basically letting Poirot know that he is indeed the GOAT, greatest of all time to do it.
I love you, man.
And that Scotland Yard is probably grateful that he's back in it. But this is when Poirot brings up a bit of an anomaly in his life, something that has roused his inner inspector and sent his hairs a prickling, letting us readers know that this is going to be the beginning of the murder mystery. And unlike any other murder mystery I've ever seen, we have someone telling our inspector, I'm going to commit a murder, which... What? I'm going to go ahead and read it. Suddenly, with a brief, decisive nod of the head, he crossed the room to a desk near the window. Its contents, I need hardly say, were all neatly docketed and pigeonholed, so that he was able at once to lay a hand upon the paper he wanted. He came slowly across to me, an open letter in his hand. He read it through himself, then passed it to me. Tell me, mon ami, he said, what do you make of this? I took it from him with some interest. It was written on thickish white notepaper in printed characters. Mr. Hercule Poirot, you fancy yourself, don't you, at solving mysteries that are too difficult for our poor, thick-headed British police. Let us see, Mr. Clever Poirot, just how clever you can be. Perhaps you'll find this nut too hard to crack. Look out for Andover. Now, Hastings asks why he isn't just kind of brushing this off as a prankster, to which I learn a new old-timey saying, because Poirot says, yeah, this could just be a tight man. Excuse me, sir? The things that stand out here, one I caught immediately, which is calling the cops dumb. Another, though, is pointed out later on in the book, so I'll bring it up to you now, and that's that they said our police, indicating that this is a possibly native British person. That's the kind of clue that in detective novels, things could always potentially hinge on. But in the real world, I just feel like, I don't know, that's not something anyone would take into account, because it's just like something you don't think about. Am I crazy? But every time they're like, oh, they said it's our city, so they have to be born here. I've lived in Pittsburgh less than a month, and I already say it's my city, our city, I don't know. But it's a good murder mystery clue. It's good in the sense of literature. Now, the next couple narrative steps are actually where I get my first inkling of trying to solve this. Follow with me here, because Poirot did go to the police with this letter. He had them dusted for fingerprints. There were none, which is why he feels like this murder letter has an aura of actual death around it. But this chapter ends with Poirot speaking into existence an ominous prophecy, where Hastings says, well, we should keep an eye out for any robberies or arsons or something like that that happens in this town. To which Poirot says, or a murder. Dun, dun, dun. And it wasn't even until he said that I realized, like, oh yeah, that letter did not promise murder. So I don't know, I kind of jumped the gun there. This leads us to the most sinister but also uneventful part of the book, where this is what makes it so that this could possibly not be the most best structured setup for a murder mystery solve along Agatha Christie book. We just have a non-Hastings POV chapter from a man named Mr. Alexander Bonaparte Cust, who gets up, starts lighting a cheap cigarette and smoking while he types away at a typewriter. And I realize at this point that this is a book about a serial killer, which isn't like your typical murder mystery. Knives Out, most of Sherlock Holmes, the other Agatha Christie books, just, you know, all of them, where you have a cast of characters you look through and try to find. But instead, this could be more of like a Seven situation, where just, oh, there is a killer and we have to work toward finding them. That being said, nothing in this chapter directly confirms that Mr. Bonaparte Cust is our serial killer. But why else would we have that and also have the detail of cigarettes, which you'll see why that's important soon, be introduced here unless it is. But what's interesting is I don't actually think this is the serial killer, possibly. I actually have my own theory developing we'll get into soon. But now we're going to cut back to Hastings POV, and they are actually having the next day an inspector come and visit. Now, of course, Poirot, being an experienced private detective, did send off that letter to be fingerprinted by the police. And part of the reason he found that letter to be so melodious and have an aura of legitimate danger was because it came back with no fingerprints on it. And if you were just a drunkard or someone playing a prank, you likely wouldn't think to wipe it down for the prints. So the police were aware that a murder could be being called in from this town, but they send over Inspector Japp. That's really his name? I didn't know that was a name someone could have, Japp, but all right. And Inspector Japp clearly has had a long history with Hastings and Poirot. One that I actually quite like the dynamic of, because Poirot doesn't really seem to have a problem with him, but picks up on the fact that Hastings definitely does. And it doesn't really seem to be Japp's fault, but he makes kind of an insensitive, I guess, comment towards the fact that Hastings is clearly balding a little bit. And later on, Hastings is just saying, like, yeah, he sucks. I'm not balding. And I don't know why there's this thematic build happening specifically in this book to really emphasize Poirot's age and retirement, the fact that he's dyeing his hair to try and look younger, and Hastings is balding, and, you know, they're not in their youthful prime. There's potentially this in all of their inspector books together, kind of talking about how old they are. I'm not sure yet, surprisingly, despite this being my third Agatha Christie book. This is only the first time I've seen these two's dynamic together. But due to some things that happened later on, and the fact that the first victim is a bit older, this does actually seem to be a theme that is focused on here in the story. But speaking of said victim, they're not reported yet, because Japp comes in and just says, yeah, I guess that letter was just a whole bunch of hooey, because there's no murder coming from that town yet being reported. And this is actually something where I was, why would you come in early in the day when, like, there certainly could be something still found or reported for like several days after? I think it's actually the 22nd he comes in, but like not every nook and cranny is searched. So I wouldn't come in confidently being like, no murders for sure, we're good. Oh, before Inspector Japp comes back though, Poirot and Hastings actually have like a really meta, almost feels like it's lifted from like a Scream movie dialogue about the typical formulas for murder mysteries. And there's again a reference to Sherlock Holmes in this book. Agatha Christie was meta ahead of her time in some pretty substantial ways that I really like. She clearly is someone who not only laid the foundations for this genre, but had contemporaries that influenced her and was a glowing fan. Like, the fact that Agatha Christie is a huge fan of murder mystery is not only overt in the text, but I find to be a deeply charming reason why her books are so fun. She knows what murder mystery fans like. But then he comes back later in the day and then's like, never mind, there actually was a murder. Death has come. And yeah, it's a poor old lady named Mrs. Asher who sold cigarettes and tobacco, leading us to this cheap cigarettes guy. Now, the only reason I'm actually a little bit hesitant to just say, oh, that's the serial killer, we're going to occasionally be jumping their POV for an interesting little insert, is because it says cheap tobacco. And as far as I can recall, nothing about Miss Ashner's store says she sells cheap tobacco. Granted, she's poor. It's described as kind of a tiny little store, but I don't know. We need more information than past chapter 8 where I stopped for damn good reason, you'll see. So of course, Hastings and Poirot go off to the town and immediately get the 411 from the inspector. The last patron to successfully buy tobacco from Miss Ashner came in at 5:30 p.m. There was someone who came into her store at 6:05 p.m. who banged on the counter, looked for her, but didn't see her, not realizing, a little bit disturbingly, that she was dead behind the counter, likely. Ugh. How she died was bashed into the back of the head with something heavy. But an officer around 1 a.m. was doing rounds and noticed her store was unlocked, went in and found her dead body with a flashlight. She has a niece, but that's really the only family that they're aware of, and they're not exactly in this town. They're a little bit further out, to the point where when they interview them later, they have to go on a bit of a trip to find her niece. But the big red flag right away in this case is she had an abusive husband she was estranged from, who would constantly come around and harass her for money. Miss Ashner is an abuse victim, but that being said, it's not going to be this husband character who is brought in for an interview and just completely falls apart. An embarrassing drunken fool who actually kind of speaks like Gollum.
What do you want with me? I have not done nothing. It is a shame and a scandal to bring me here. You are swine. How dare you?
His manner changed suddenly.
No, no, I do not mean that. You would not hurt a poor old man. Not be hard on him. Everyone is hard on poor old Franz. Poor old Franz.
Okay, maybe it's just the fact that he briefly referred to himself in the third person. Maybe it's the fact that he just had that sudden mood shift. That's probably not enough for most people to call him Smeagol/Gollum-esque, but it was for some reason in my head. Problem is, though, not only does Mr. Ashner have tons of people who can attest to his whereabouts, he just doesn't really fit the profile, despite the fact that he was apparently constantly begging and bugging his wife for money, and some people saying being abusive about it. But the thing is, he was constantly bugging her for money. That's why he kept coming around, except the money was still in the drawer at the store, and there was no sign of theft, which, again, is another one of those things that's like a really good murder mystery book clue. But in the real world, if someone out of rage suddenly kills someone else, even if they are constantly begging for money, I don't feel like that human being is going to still be like, oh, give me the money. And a lot of them would just freak out and run. I don't know if Agatha Christie, which approach she would have on that level of human behavior. The only reason I say that is we actually see her address human behavior in a very realistic way a little bit later in this book. So just keep that in mind. Or just realize I'm keeping that in mind. At this point, though, the inspector tells Poirot and Hastings that there was one more clue found at the store, and it was actually an A.B.C, which apparently in London at this time is shorthand for a train map of all the local routes and times. And once again, there were no fingerprints found on it, and it was left face down on the countertop. So the police are still saying, like, yeah, if it wasn't for that letter, I would certainly think it's the abusive husband who did this. But we have that letter and now this map, which is certainly strange. Now, this is where Agatha Christie begins to really impress me once again. Because despite the fact that this victim never had a voice on the page, Miss Ashner is actually given quite a beautiful portrait of a sad life through this investigation. She has had her voice taken from her, but we learn so much about who she was and the rather tragic condition she obviously lived in and how society mistreated her. Because as we've established, she had this abusive husband coming around, constantly bugging her for money and yelling at her and threatening to kill her, cut her throat, horrible stuff, but people just let it be because it was her husband and that's the time people are living in. Gross. Yet on top of that, she has this small shop that's not really impressive, lives above it in a room that Poirot and Hastings actually leave because despite the cops obviously having gone through it and searched for evidence, all they can really feel is that it's a sad living condition. She even had just a completely undecorated, empty room. The only family she had is this niece who is further out from the city, and they finally go to interview. And Hastings is a bit like surprised by that, saying, oh, you don't want to go to the scene of the murder? And Poirot says, no, no, no. We find out later it's because he wants to go to the scene of the murder between 5:30 to 6 to make sure that the conditions are as close as they could be to the actual murder. Smart. But going to see Mary, her niece, we learn more things about Miss Ashner, where One, her niece Mary seems to be very genuinely upset that Ashner is dead, so she possibly did have a good relationship with this niece. We also saw a picture of this niece in Ashner's room, but Mary feels bad for how alone her aunt was, though pushes back on the idea that her husband just totally dominated and abused her, and says when Ashner was pushed far enough, she would snap on her husband and send him running with his tail between his legs. Yeah, I like Miss Ashner. But she was struggling to barely make ends meet. And, you know, it's just, god damn, dude. I really ended up feeling awful for Miss Ashner at this point in the story, to the point where I drew this little lonely rendition of her, because we even see later on, after they leave Mary and go to the murder scene, in the evening while the sun is going down, there are still all these people standing around staring at her store, drawn by the toxic curiosity of knowing another human being died here. And the police are trying to make them move along, but this woman who is so ignored in life is finally getting attention and people caring about her only after she is just senselessly killed. Oh, I do have to say, Mary, I did kind of evaluate to see if they were going to be a person of interest, a suspect, and remember, everybody is a suspect. But I don't think it's Mary, even though I had an itch for a second, purely because she says she's a servant in a house where the person who owns it's gone and out of town. So no one's really keeping a track on her, and she certainly could have made a trip into town at this time to kill someone. But it's noted that Ashner was hit from behind with this heavy thing while she was likely turning around to her shelves to get cigarettes for somebody. And so I don't think she would be doing that, one, to her husband, or two, to her niece. It's a weird thing, but if I'm with a customer, I'll turn around to grab them something. But if I'm like talking to someone who I know, I feel like I'm just more instinctively likely to kind of only like maybe do a half turn. I'm not sure. That's weird. Stop reading into it that much. And again, we have more conversation between Hastings and Poirot that's quite poignant, where these weirdos kind of point out the damage that alcohol and addiction clearly did to what was once a lovely marriage. But then Poirot goes and starts telling lies, because he, after this conversation happens, tells Hastings that the English never give up information willingly if you just ask questions. So instead, you go in and state something wrong, and they'll start correcting you. And as someone who grew up in the information internet age, I have to say, Agatha Christie, streets ahead of her time. Through a setup with Hastings, he goes into the neighbor's shop, says that he heard a bald bearded Russian did it and has been arrested. And at a certain point in this conversation, Hastings comes in and says, no, I wasn't that. I heard it was a short little guy. At that point, people in the store start saying, I didn't see that go by. I saw this kind of looking person, that kind of person looking go by. But no one saw Mr. Ashner, and that's for sure.
No, mon ami. If I had simply asked, as you put it, I should have got no answer at all to my questions. You yourself are English, and yet you do not seem to appreciate the quality of the English reaction to a direct question. It is invariably one of suspicion and the natural result of reticence. If I had asked those people for information, they would have shut up like oysters. But by making a statement, and a somewhat out of the way and preposterous one, and by your contradiction of it, tongues are immediately loosened. We know also that the particular time was a busy time, that is, that everyone would be intent on their own concerns, and that there would be a fair number of people passing by the pavements. Our murderer chooses his time well, Hastings.
He goes to see another neighbor who kind of repeats a lot of the same information, but also says that the niece should have been with her and not left poor Miss Old Ashner alone. And I kind of agree. But again, this reemphasizes that Mr. Ashner really couldn't have gotten by all these people without them noticing, because while they were all busy and focused on their own stuff, it was known when Mr. Ashner came around by everybody that there would likely be a scene as he's trying to get more money. And so I feel like, yes, a random murderer could slip in and out unnoticed. Mr. Ashner, not as much. Now, on top of that, that does lead to the conclusion that this killer chose his time specifically and well, likely being familiar with the area, in my opinion. But in reality, Poirot is confused. He's not sure what exactly is going on. He knows this is the beginning of something bigger because of the wiped fingerprints and the letter, but he says, I think the A.B.C. killer won this first round. I don't know what to do from here. Except he then makes a very man observation of the time, which is, but I don't think it's necessarily for sure a man. It could be a woman, because women are the ones who send anonymous letters. I don't think that holds true. And I think, as someone who hasn't read a lot of Poirot stories, this is actually a bit outside the usual for the formula, because Hastings at one point actually goes to Poirot, well, like, what do you expect? Give me the big reveal. And Poirot says, I know it was a ginger with a hunched shoulder and a mole on his right rib cage. And Hastings is like, what? Oh my. And Poirot's like, no, dude, I don't know. Like, I'm not Sherlock Holmes. He actually says that. And he's like, we don't have any clues, but clues aren't everything. What we have done is talk to a cast of characters, which does feel like Agatha Christie is saying there aren't a lot of clues yet in the narrative, but we have talked to individuals. This is going to be a personality-based murder mystery. I am reaching here, I'm aware. We've also had it twice directed towards women. So I am at this point most eyeballing Mary, though I don't think it's her, but we have an opportunity, and the neighbor, Miss Fowler. But I really read through her passage again, and there was nothing there to make me think she was anything aside from a neighbor. And with this being a serial killer, why would we start with someone who's so close to us, with like them being my aunt? That just seems like extra dangerous and pointless. And that just leads me to suspect Miss Asher herself. No, I'm gonna be real with you on this one. I'm kind of swinging in shadows. I don't feel like I can even give a good second theory, which is why I was really happy to see the second letter arrive. I feel like I needed a clue or a hint, help. Before this letter arrives, we also get, apparently amazingly from Hastings, a good amount of time passes, and he's kind of even forgetting about the case. And at first I was judging him hella hardcore for this, but then I realized, one, it's playing into the theme of this first victim being a little old lady who no one's going to pay attention to the point where even the press isn't really writing about this murder, which Hastings even notes is out of the ordinary for Poirot's cases. The only thing that's bringing in Poirot is the letter, which makes all of this more interesting. And on top of that, he's an experienced investigator. And he even does say he feels bad for Miss Ashner, but you know, this is just his life, or it has been. Yet now, another letter arrives, and it says,
Dear Mr. Poirot, well, what about it? First game to me, I think. The Andover business went with a swing, but the fun's only just beginning. Let me draw your attention to Bexhill-on-Sea, date the 25th inst. What a merry time we are having. Yours, A.B.C. Good God, Poirot, I cried. Does this mean that this friend is going to attempt another crime? Naturally, Hastings. What else do you expect? Did you think that Andover's business was an isolated case? Do you not remember my saying, this is the beginning? But this is horrible. Yes, this is horrible. We're up against a homicidal maniac, yes.
At this point, Poirot brings together actually some like detectives and higher commissioners and stuff to discuss the fact that they have a homicidal murder. And Poirot says, like, I'm really afraid this could go on and be a bigger, worse thing. And I'm kind of, at this point, a little feeling conflicted on choosing what seems to be a rather big case in the Poirot bibliography, because there is a lot of kind of weight being added into this case that is resonating all the harder due to the fact that we've successfully established an emotional connection to the first victim. And it doesn't feel like Poirot normally deals with serial killers. And I'm sitting here like, this is my first time with you guys together as a duo. But it also means as a murder mystery, I feel like I'm starting on hard mode. Unless, you know, he's just the serial killer, Mr. Alexander Bonaparte Cust. In which case, I'm still going to have a really good time. Poirot confirms to the group, though, that yes, the second victim's name is going to start with a B, because they're doing the town and the name thing again. Terrifying. And with the schools breaking up and the time of year that it is, again, this is going to be a busy town. This killer is planning and precise, no fingerprints. This person actually is succeeding to being kind of impactful on the page with these mocking letters and clueless crimes. Some officers are dispatched to keep an eye on the Ashner business and watch the potential suspects from that case, potentially, you know, somehow going over to this town that was mentioned to do another murder. But this chapter ends, and you'll see why I decided to stop here, quite dramatically. So I feel like things are about to escalate.
Poirot, I said as we walked along by the river, surely this crime can be prevented. He turned a haggard face to me. The sanity of a city full of men against the insanity of one man. I fear, Hastings. I very much fear. Remember the long-continued success of Jack the Ripper. It's horrible, I said. Madness, Hastings, is a terrible thing. I am afraid. I am very much afraid.
We're seeing our guy get shook, like seriously shook. Damn. But now I shall end our little adventure together there, my goblins, and read 8 to 10 more chapters before reporting back to you and trying to solve who exactly is the A.B.C. killer. I want to know how this guy's going to be tied in. The more I think about it, the more I think he's not a serial killer. And this is like going to be someone else who contributed to solving the crime potentially. And if I had to take a shot in the dark, it would be Mary. But I have no why. I have no why for why she would have done this. Ladies and gentlemen, we got him. And by that, I mean, I have absolutely no idea what's going on. I'm very confused. Yeah, I kind of just lied to you. Gonna be real. I am a bit stumped, and I feel like there have been red herrings dangled in front of me. But at the same time, I'm also more confident than ever that there is a solution to this within the text. It's not the red herring false flag that we got before, but instead it's going to be a character we come across during an investigation. I just have no idea who, because there have just been these little personality quirks and things here and there that feel like Agatha Christie is setting us up to say, you as a reader, pay attention, look at the profile we are building, and that is going to be the match you need to be able to smack on to one of these associated individuals to figure out who the serial killer is going to be. Now, not only is this impressive from Agatha Christie because she's ahead of her time in terms of like having profiling be a thing, and we also get terms like series killer, which is what serial killers were called before they were called serial killers. Watch the show Mindhunter. It's amazing, though very loosely based off the true story there, but still well worth watching. Okay, this isn't a bad Agatha Christie novel to do this experiment with. It's just an alternative one, and I need to adapt. Let's get into what's happened since we failed to find the serial killer, the A.B.C. murderer, after his second killing. Because we see some time goes by, Hastings and Poirot are both really actually getting into this case. They're not just forgetting about it between crimes like we saw before, and they're counting the days until finally,
mail.
The next letter arrives. Hastings is awoken by Poirot, who gently shakes him and says the most ominous words you could in this situation. It has happened. And it turns out that a woman named Betty Berard has been killed in that town that was mentioned, and our killer's getting arrogant, that's for sure. There's going to be a new inspector introduced in a new town. This one's going to be Inspector Crome, who actually is now at the top of my suspect list. Believe it or not, because he is arrogant when Poirot and Hastings come across him, but that quite literally is my entire reason for thinking that Inspector Crome is possibly our guilty party. Also, I'm aware in the last part I kept calling Miss Ashner dyslexia. I don't know what else to tell you aside from I'm severely dyslexic, and it comes through sometimes. Anyway, Betty was strangled to death by a belt, her own belt, and left in Baxhill. So of course we have to investigate a new cast of characters, except immediately, while Agatha Christie does take the time to once again give Betty a life and a voice posthumously, which I think is really cool as a writer. We see that she worked at a tea shop. She did have a friend she was going to marry who had a bit of a temper, but after interviewing her employer and seeing that her parents are genuinely sad at her death, we aren't really left with any good suspects. And that's because when we meet Betty's sister, Poirot actually has one of my favorite character moments yet for him in any book I've read, where he kind of gets what should be a grieving sister to be brutally honest about Betty.
The girl sat down on the edge of the kitchen table. She felt in her bag for a cigarette. She placed it between her lips, lighted it, and then set in between two puffs of smoke. Somehow, I don't see what M. Poirot is doing in our humble little crime. Mademoiselle, said Poirot, what you do not see and what I do not see would probably fill a volume. But all of that is of no practical importance. What is of practical importance is something that would not be easy to find. What's that? Death, mademoiselle, unfortunately creates a prejudice in favor of the deceased. I heard what you said just now to my friend Hastings, a nice, bright girl with no men friends. You said that in mockery of the newspapers, and it is very true when a young girl is dead that the kind of thing is said. She was bright, she was happy, she was sweet-tempered, she had not a care in the world, she had no undesirable acquaintances. There is a great charity always to the dead. Do you know what I should like this minute? I should like to find someone who knew Elizabeth Bernard, and who does not know she is dead. Then perhaps I should hear what is useful for me, the truth. Megan Bernard looked at him for a few minutes in silence while she smoked. Then, at last, she spoke. Her words made me jump. Betty, she said, was an unmitigated little ass.
All of that's true. Great tactic, wonderful character beat, and genuinely got a ha-ha out of me. I quite like that. And from here, we learn that Megan's little sister Betty, what's the time-appropriate term for someone like this? Bit of a floozy. Someone who, yes, did have someone she was engaged to named Donald, who was the quiet type who could explode on someone and had a few blowout fights with Betty, but she would then meet up with other guys, hence why her and Donald, her fiancé, would get into it. But of course, none of this is really useful to Poirot, because the only real consistency we have from the first murder to the second murder here is if these letters didn't exist, there is an obvious suspect. First, the drunkard, abusive husband. Now, the quiet yet ill-tempered Donald. We also get the establishment of the killers getting more bold, killing the victim with an article of their own clothing. And with Betty working at a tea shop, she came in contact with tons of guys she apparently went out with. There's a description of one with spectacles. There's a description of a well-dressed naval guy. And this is no clues again, and Poirot's, damn it, I can't figure out what to do. And this leads to another meeting with Dr. Thompson and constables and people of import, where they're trying to figure out, should they let the public know that they have a, quote, series killer on the loose who is targeting people by alphabetical name and town. And this is actually a really difficult real-world question, and I do not envy the people who had to find out whether or not, it's the right or wrong call to publish, like, the Zodiac's letters. The reason it's actually becoming a more difficult call, though, Agatha Christie, again, being aware of society and human behavior, points out the fact that the public is actually really paying more attention to this case because it's not a sad, old, lonely woman who was murdered and only her community showed up to, like, gawk at her store after she died in it, but the papers are writing about this one, and should we let everyone know and have millions of people trying to solve this along with us, creating just tons of chaos? Or should we keep it just us? They decide for now, we need to at least keep it under wraps, try and get this before the next murder. We have to wait for another letter. But what we do know for sure is he has a set hit list, A through Z, and Poirot kind of makes a joking bet with Dr. Thompson and Hastings and all these commissioners in the room going back and forth with Crome and all of that, that he will get the murder solved by F. Little unprofessional, but totally in character with Poirot, and I actually quite like this with his fierce mustaches. And Hastings kind of being a dumb oaf doesn't say much. And I don't mean that as an insult. Hastings is a really good character, but it's clear Agatha Christie is writing him as a bit of a dolt. He's just kind of slow, and Poirot kind of keeps him around because it seems that while Hastings does have some areas of knowledge that are useful for Poirot, he more just likes having someone, I think he just likes Hastings. And I think Hastings has a good read on Poirot, and that's why they get along. I think I need to read more because I'm kind of starting at a weird tense point in their relationship, but I like that even in the highest moments of tension so far in the book, him and Hastings are making comments and jokes at each other and kind of having fun. But the one thing Poirot does know is that this is about him. And he's not sure if it's because possibly the killer is someone who he harmed in the past. Maybe the person doesn't like him being a famous wealthy foreigner here in London. There could be a plethora of reasons, but this actually does focus here on our detective. Fascinating. And I really hope the answer isn't someone from a previous book, because unless it's the murder of Roger Ackroyd, oops. But the next letter does arrive after days. So in this meeting with all these commissioners and stuff, with Crome and Dr. Thompson there, we actually had they point out the psychology of this person isn't targeting people who are personally annoying to them, people they don't like. They are killing essentially kind of random, but with this mad lens of, well, they're essentially treating people like game. Right? They're just trying to go through this list to do something to play. They refer to it even as a game with poireaux. And so when they get this next letter, I note it says good hunting in it. And that's another thing that made me turn around and go, okay, they just had this conversation with all these people in the room about this. The original inspector, I actually suspected Jap. No, not him. Inspector Chrome, I mean, he wasn't even in the room. Inspector Chrome was. And so could it be Inspector Chrome? I really don't think so. No, it could thematically all of this be pointing towards like a cop. Is this a cop crime? It does make the most sense. But why the woman thing? I'm really stumped on this one. But there's a mistake because they notice, oh crap, dooskies, we have a bit of a problem here. The address on the letter had been like misdelivered a couple of times. And while the letter was set to be delivered on the 27th, it wasn't delivered until the 30th. And here's what the new letter says.
Poor Mr. Poireaux. Not so good at these little criminal matters as you thought yourself, are you? Rather past your prime, perhaps? Let us see if you can do any better this time. This time, it's an easy one. Churston on the 30th. Do try and do something about it. It's a bit dull having it all my own way, you know. Good hunting, ever yours. A.B.C.
Oops. So with it being the day of the murder, they start immediately packing bags, and Poirot calls Scotland Yard, lets him know they got a letter, and after he gets off the phone, he comes back and goes, "What are you doing, Hastings?" This is kind of what I mean about Hastings' character. He's throwing shirts and bags, trying to be fast, and Poirot's like, okay, the train doesn't leave for hours, so there's no reason to pack like an idiot. Let's pack like normal people. And then we will, make our way to the train station and get down there. And Hastings is, oh, okay, yeah, that's fair. But eventually, before they even arrive, if I remember correctly, they find out that Sir Carmichael Clark has been killed, who's a renowned throat specialist, not in like the Glug Glug 3000 way, but in the doctoral way. And his death is absolutely going to propel the A.B.C. killer to be in the headlines, because he's a well-known, famous guy, and so they're going to have to release it to the public, which is bad, but also is definitely what the A.B.C. killer wants, as you can tell from the mocking tone of the letter. This is a motherfucker who wants attention. And I really like this next point from Poirot, and this is why I think Agatha Christie is trying to reassure us, the reader, quite overtly, I don't think I'm picking up anything subtle here, that this is still a solvable book, and we should be with her on this, because Poirot, in response to Hastings saying that this is like such a convoluted, crazy case to try and solve, says essentially, it's actually going to be the easiest once we know the madness. Once we understand the madness of this person, the reason of the pattern, why they're selecting the towns and the people for the A.B.C. they do, it's the easiest case ever, because we normally have to solve cases that are personal with planned out murders and trying to do cover-ups. It's just that there's no traditional clue path, and so we have to go this alternative way. Maybe I'm crazy, but I really feel like Agatha Christie is sitting here going, this is not your typical Agatha Christie solve-along, but you can. You got this. Stick with me here. That was the end of chapter 15. I wanted to do another record it before I got to the third murder. Now we're going to be getting into murder 3. Well. Not only does it look like I am going to be getting an F grade for this video because all of my accusations have been wildly off base. Don't worry, I'm still going to truthfully walk you through my theorizing as we progress through the story. But indeed, this may not have been the best murder mystery to pick to do a solve-along with me on. That being said, though, I actually just got through what I would consider probably my favorite stretch of any Agatha Christie book, and the end result is we have this fantastic cast of characters working within this malevolent atmosphere to try and stop a madman, and it's pretty freaking fantastic. Let's go ahead and pick up the story where we left off, though. The investigation of Sir Carmichael Clark's death reveals pretty much exactly what you would expect at this point in Us versus the A.B.C. killer. Pretty much nothing. We do know, though, there is the continued theme that there were things in his life that could drive him to die by other means. We had the abusive husband before, then we had the jealous fiance. His wife, in quite a twist, is sick with cancer and dying, terminally ill. And so when they ask people close to Clark, when they heard he's dead, what's their first reaction? Some of them think, demonetize, you know what I mean? But no, he was certainly killed by the A.B.C. killer because an A.B.C. was found right next to him. It's very distracting to have my cat peacefully napping right there in a chair. It's adorable. But in terms of actual suspects, we get nada, zilch, nothing really new come about. Though, during this time, I actually thought one of the people we meet, not his cancer-stricken wife, Miss Clark, but his secretary, Miss Gray, was gonna turn out to be the killer. I actually latched onto that super hard because basically she seemed smart. She actually kind of kept being reinserted in the narrative, and also was the first person to ask Paul, do you think that the murderer is going to successfully kill a D? And oh, the murderer was here just a few hours ago. How terrifying. And with the profile of personality we've had being built up internally, I was thinking, oh, this is the killer being like, ha 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 ha. And with the hints that it's a woman, maybe that's the best evidence we're going to get in this whole book. But don't follow me there. It's a bad path. Don't go down it. But what actually really begins to layer on the feeling of despair the A.B.C. murders permeate at this point is the fact that, yes, the press has absolutely picked this up and is talking about the fact that even Poirot and Scotland Yard cannot figure out who this person is. And yeah, the killer is getting up to D. How terrifying. And so when the next letter comes, they're kind of forced to publicize the details and make it known to everyone where it's going to happen. Because you gotta warn the people. Before we get there, though, we do get another cutaway to this mysterious Napoleon Cust, who we find to be a bit off-putting as he sits next to an individual on a bench and starts reading the paper and talks about the fact that he served in the war, he's a vet, he gets headaches, his brain hasn't been right since he fought in the war. And I'm going to be real with y'all, I was the most certain at this point, even as the guy he's sitting next to in the bench goes, whoa, you're creepy, and leaves, that it most certainly wasn't him. Because he doesn't seem like the kind of guy to write letters and he doesn't fit the profile. But maybe the theme we're going for here for Agatha Christie, which she would be right if she says, and that's that profiling is not an exact science and is often just kind of blanket bland. You see that if you get into true crime stuff, they just say oh, it's a male, white, between age 30 to 50, and probably doesn't have a great life. Yeah, that's most serial killers. Good job. Another thing that stood out to me during this section, though, that made me enjoy the story all the more, though, is the successful characterization of Poirot. Because he manages to really keep himself emotionally distant from this case, despite being openly mocked by this killer and taunted, and now even having the press constantly write fake quotes from him, because this is if you think journalism's bad now, look at journalism back in this time. Oh my God, it was misleading and often just full of fabrications. And so he has to have conversations with Hastings where Hastings says of course I didn't say this. And Poirot is I know, it's fine. In fact, I kind of like that this is happening because if our killer sees that I apparently allegedly said this stupid thing, they might begin to underestimate me and get even more sloppy. He's thinkimacating, and he even makes a statement that is kind of dispassionate and harsh, but shows his way of processing what he's being caught up in. And again, Agatha Christie just impresses me with her ability to craft an individual here, because Hastings is clearly getting bothered by the fact that there is a fourth person, a fourth victim out there that they are likely not going to be able to save, to which Wawa says 120 people are likely going to die in the next very short amount of time in motor car accidents. We can't do anything about that. So the best thing we can do now is sit, rest, process, think, and keep it cool, calm, and collected. And I think that's pretty cool. He also has an idea put forward because of a letter he receives not from the A.B.C. killer.
Dear Sir, I hope you will forgive the liberty I take in writing to you. I have been thinking a lot since these awful 2 murders. Like poor aunties, it seems as though we're all in the same boat, as it were. I saw the young lady's picture in the paper. The young lady, I mean, that is the sister of the young lady that was killed at Baxil. I made so bold as to write to her and tell her I was coming to London to get a place and asked if I could come to her or her mother, as I said 2 heads might be better than 1, and I would not want much wages, but only to find out who this awful fiend is, and perhaps we might get at it better if we could say what we knew something might come of it. The young lady wrote very nicely and said as how she worked in an office and lived in a hostel, but she suggested I might write to you, and she said she's been thinking of something of the same kind as I had, and she said we were in the same trouble and we ought to stand together. So I am writing, sir, to say I am coming to London, and this is my address. I hope I am not troubling you. Yours respectfully, Mary Drower. Mary Drower, said Poirot, is a very intelligent girl. He picked up another letter. Read this. It was from Franklin Clark, saying he was coming to London and would call upon Poirot the following day, if not inconvenient. Do not despair, mon ami, said Poirot. Action is about to begin.
I swear to God, I'm going to fix the lighting situation in this room ASAP. But it was at this point that I realized I have not done a good enough job establishing this cast of characters who are coming together to be, as it's referred to within the Agatha Christie fandom, Poirot's Legion, which is just fabulous. So let's go ahead and name every single one of these potential amateur detectives joining in on the case who are already connected to the crimes. First, we have Mary Drower, who is Asher's niece. What do we know about her? Well, she's moving to London. So does she have any potential connection to actually wanting to execute these crimes? Well, I mean, she's kind of free now that she's not tied down to her aunt, but all we've really seen from her is that she really did love her aunt, Miss Asher. So that's not exactly the best thing to go off of. Next, we have Donald Fraser, who is Betty, the second victim's fiancé. And there's maybe a little bit more motivation there, as he suspected Betty may have been a bit of a flooze. In fact, we know she was, and he is the angry, quiet type. Could cheating be a motivation for him to then go off and do all of these murders, or possibly slip a murder in amongst them? We shall see. Next up, we have Thora Gray. And I realized throughout this video I've been saying Theodora Gray, assuming that Thora is short for Theodora. I don't actually know that's true, but she is so hot. And she was Clark, the third victim's assistant. What would really be her motivation? Well, is she in the will or something? Well, we haven't had any indication of that. So not a whole lot pointing us towards the almost as fine as that one guy from The Murder of Roger Ackroyd, if you know what I'm talking about. Next up, we have Megan Bernard, Betty's sister. She's very smart and honest. She's the one who, when puts forward everything that needs to be done for him to be able to solve this case, is willing to just say, my sister's an ass. Is that a motivation for murder? I don't find honesty typically to be an indication of someone being of the variety. And then finally, we have Franklin Clark, who is, of course, the third victim, Clark's brother. He is a bit of a traveling playboy, as they say, someone who isn't really connected to any place. And the only thing he's really come into after his brother died is now he has to take care of his brother's terminally ill, sick wife. So not exactly a ton of motivation there either. So on the whole, it seems to try and take down the A.B.C. killer, Poirot is managing to put together a genuine cast of do-gooders who are going to get his back. Or is Poirot successfully taking the most likely suspects and putting them all in a room together so we can continually interrogate them subtly? I'll let you decide. And when they all come together, we actually get really nice characterization for all of them. Poirot begins to give this luxurious speech about putting their minds together and trying to decipher the information, but Mary actually kind of cuts through it and says, you're saying a whole lot of nothing. And Poirot later on makes a comment to Hastings that, like, she's smart. She knew I was just trying to motivate people, and what I was saying was kind of a lot of hooey. And my suspicions of Theodora Gray grew to an all-time high because Poirot is having follow-up questions to nearly everyone who's there, except for Theodora Gray, where she says something that's kind of a nothing answer to a question, and he just moves right on from her. And I caught that, and I thought, that's a big deal. Turns out, no. But everyone is given something to do by the end of this meeting of victims. We see Bernard and Fraser, Donald Fraser, are going to go meet with Higley, the co-worker of his fiance who was murdered, to try and suss out more information from her. We see Mary is going to go talk to the children around her aunt's shop who wouldn't really speak to police but might talk to this young servant woman who is more known to the community. And Franklin Clark is going to put out a taunting ad in the paper to try and goad the A.B.C. killer into making a mistake. And he's going to sign it XYZ after claiming he has information that he could give to the police. It's whatever. And Poirot even admits all this is kind of just busy work, and the real oomph coming from this meeting actually comes when Franklin Clark comes forward and says that his sister-in-law, Sir Carmichael Clark's wife, who's dying of cancer, actually does want to see him if Poirot and Hastings wouldn't mind going down out of London again. To which he agrees to go see this woman who, in a very sad way, is continually being pumped with drugs like morphine so that the pain of her cancer will not overwhelm her. And this is an interesting little back and forth that made me, at this point, lock in almost, not quite there, Miss Gray as the killer. It just became, again, a little too obvious, so I got gun shy. But what she says, though, is, oh, Theodora Gray told you that she didn't see anyone come to our property the day that my husband was murdered? She's a liar, because I saw her talk to a salesman at the door, and yeah, I'm on tons of drugs and doped up, but I'm sure she lied because I saw her for sure talk to some shady looking fella who was at our door. And so Hastings and Poirot, after leaving, kind of get into it over this, where Poirot is telling Hastings, you are far too charitable towards this beautiful woman, because Hastings keeps saying how, oh, this old dying woman just has it out for the young, beautiful Theodora. And if I mention that Hastings is kind of an idiot, we once again have Poirot even pointed out to him at one point later on, kind of telling Hastings, like, you're dumb. You're pretty dumb. I love you, buddy. You're not good at this detective game. I have you around because you're my friend. And the strangest beat of this whole story, Donald comes to see Hastings and Poirot once they're back in London, and he tells them, I keep having these reoccurring nightmares where I murder my fiance with a belt, like what happened with the killer, except when I look at her face at the end of the dream, it's actually Mary. Why is that happening? And before Poirot could really say anything about that, I mean, the guy's grieving under a lot of pressure and stress, so maybe that makes sense. I'm not sure, but Jesus, guy. A letter is dropped into their apartment. Hastings grabs it, and it is for sure the next A.B.C. killer letter. And it reads,
Still no success, Fee. What are you and the police doing? Well, isn't this fun? And where shall we go next for honey? Poor Mr. Poirot. I'm quite sorry for you. If at first you don't succeed, try again. We've a long way to go still. Tipperary? No, that comes further on. Letter T. The next little incident will take place at Doncaster on September 11th. So long, A.B.C.
Ben, editor of this video, don't you dare put a 9/11 joke in here. Don't you do it. I can feel you right now trying to resist, and you're failing, and I gotta tell you gotta succeed. Of course, this results in all of the police coming back in. We have Chrome, we have Dr. Thompson, and everyone's trying to get into the details of how bad is this going to be. We can absolutely go warn everyone in Dorcastle. But an observation is made that I did not understand at all at first, but definitely makes this situation far harder and fits into the pattern of our killer researching his areas and setting himself up for success despite how cocky he seems to be getting in these letters, because that town is actually going to be hosting horse races during that day. So a ton of people are going to be in and out of the city. It's going to be crowded and packed and a bunch of out-of-towners, so it's going to be very hard to manage to prevent whatever this murder is going to be. But with everyone coming back in and maximum pressure built, Poirot takes the opportunity to look at Lady Grey and ask her about her lie. Why didn't you tell us that someone came to the door that day, you piece of shit? No, he didn't do that. But like, you know, he asks her, to which she says, what? No one. Oh, they did. It was just some fellow trying to sell me stockings, and I didn't want to go back and like forcibly edit this in, but it's a pretty obvious repeated thing that I should have caught on. In our first two murders, stockings were mentioned. There was a new pair that had been bought, I think, by our first victim, and our second victim had gifted, or maybe I have that backwards. I think it was that the aunt gifted a pair of stockings to Mary, and that there was a new pair of stockings in packaging in the second murder victim, Betty's place, something like that. But here now we have the third, which is too many for a coincidence. 3 new stocking things. All right, our serial killer is a stockings seller, which made me go, okay, then it's definitely not this Napoleon Cust, because he hasn't done anything with stockings. He's just a weirdo who's reading about the case. I'm wrong. And actually, I was this point now I was really sure of Crome, because more people were making comments about how Inspector Crome is this insufferable ass and keeps just almost coming across like he's got it figured out, but he's dismissive of everyone else. No, what Agatha Christie is just establishing is a great cast of characters. It is most definitely Napoleon Cust. Why do I say that, huh? Why do I say it's most certainly him? Well, we cut to his POV once again, and he's packing for a trip. And he tells his neighbor he's going to this one town, and he's just uncomfortable and odd, and he's just weird and kind of crazy, and he heads out on his way. And then his neighbor starts thinking about the fact that he went on another trip. Last time that the town he went to was only a few miles away from that murder that happened. And before that, he definitely did travel in the time of that first murder. And she's talking to her boo as they're dancing in their apartment, adorably, by the way, a very cute couple. And the guy mentions, wait, I saw him going not to the town he told you he was going to, but I saw him at the train station on the way in here, and he was going to go to Dorchester. And they're like, wow, is he the killer? Nah, can't be him. He wouldn't hurt a fly. I've seen Psycho. This came out before Psycho, but like, so it's him. And if you don't think it's him yet, we're gonna get him soon, because we then see our party is arrived in the town. It's a busy, crazy day, and we see that Poirot is actually still managing to keep it extremely level-headed, and I really respect how he's written as an inspector here, because everyone else seems to be totally disheartened. How could they even theoretically, in these crowded streets, catch the killer? There's so many people milling about. It's insanity out here, and only one person vaguely remembers seeing their face, Miss Grey, to which Poirot says, he's a gambler. And no matter how long your winning streak goes, you're eventually going to come up red. And he could have had someone just walk in on him in the first murder. This isn't a mastermind. This isn't some genius. It's just someone who's playing a really dangerous game, a game I refuse to play. And that is such a brilliant beat for this flamboyant inspector to just not actually be drawn in. Because that's the key. We often in modern media do idolize and put up serial killers on these pedestals of geniuses, but no, it's kind of, especially back then, easy to get away with murder. And a lot of them are just attention whores who got off on what they were doing. And Poirot basically keeping himself divorced from actually sitting down at the table with the killer and just keeping himself as removed as possible makes him a great detective and makes it so his ego is not a factor in the case. I actually maybe controversial thing to say because I'm only 2 books in, am immediately ranking Poirot for this as like one of my most competent favorite book detectives. And I'm going beyond the Sherlock Holmes like impossible solves. Like I'm not trying to say like the difficulties of the case they solve, but I'm saying like how they act in the case on the page with the murder of Roger Ackroyd and now this. Agatha Christie writes an amazing detective. We have Mr. Clark, the surviving brother of Sir Carmichael Clark, come forward, and just because he knows that his sister-in-law definitely told Poirot that Miss Grey is awful, he shows a letter from his brother that basically establishes that Miss Grey, to him, was more just a daughter, and it wasn't like anything appropriate or inappropriate was happening, and Poirot kind of just puts that to the side. I think this is just Agatha Christie trying to subvert the idea that a lot of people would instinctively have that there was something scandalous going on there, and was certainly implied by like a bit of jealousy going on from the dying wife. Agatha Christie just has a very human read on people and the reader. She's ahead of her time. But Hastings being Hastings, the little horned dog whose wife is still waiting for him in South America, tells Poirot like, oh, I'm going to go escort one of the ladies who's out there trying to help us find the killer. And Poirot's like, oh, you mean you're going to go try and spend the day with Miss Grey? And Hastings is like, I mean, maybe. But Poirot says, no, I need you to hang out with Mary because we're in Dorchester. And guess what? Her last name? Trower. And this egotistical killer might be keeping track of who's around us and who's with us. You definitely need to keep her protected. And Hastings is like, bet, that's a really good point. Cut back to, we're now in a movie theater with a random individual we've never met before who has this uncomfortable guy get up in front of him in the middle of the movie and walk out. And he's like, okay, that's annoying. Don't walk out during the middle of a movie. And then as the movie ends, he gets up to leave and he notices there's a guy sleeping in the row in front of him. And then more and more people kind of start coming around that guy. And, oh, he's been stabbed to death in the movie theater? That's so creepy. I don't know why that's so creepy, but the idea of being stabbed to death in a dark, quiet movie theater, that's horrifying. And then, just to really seal home who absolutely did that, we cut to Napoleon Cust's POV, and he's got blood on his hands in his apartment trying to wash it off. And then someone in the hotel or whatever he's staying in comes to bring him warm water and sees him washing blood off himself with cold water. And he's like, I cut my hand. And like, he's holding his hands out and there's no cut, pretty obviously. And that woman just after a beat's like, end of his luck. And that is where I stopped reading. And the only mystery left is how our detective and pals, because this has turned into a symbol team setup, is going to find the killer. And I'm really excited. This is actually probably, in terms of enjoyment, my favorite Agatha Christie read so far. In terms of mystery and my being able to solve it, big fat F. I'm getting a for the day. Agatha Christie showed me the serial killer, set up a serial killer, and clearly had like none of the witnesses or acquaintances of the victims have any real solid inclination that they were the killer. And I was just like, no. It's going to be about the profiling. So I fail, but I'm really I'm eager to see how this one ends. And I can't wait. This has been a lot of fun. So let's dive on into the conclusion. I'm going to read to the end now. I'm going to be real with y'all. This isn't sitting right with me. I have not read another page, and instead I just did the first pass through edit on that chunk of recording process behind the scenes look here. I usually just kind of cut out all the bad takes and dead footage before sending it off to Ben, our lovely editor for these longer videos, who does such a good job of doing the funnies. And it just, after all the evidence we've had, after all the profile emphasis thematically, I don't believe the answer can be as simple as Napoleon Cust. I'm being itched and there's something more here, and I've been feeling that. I was just nervous to say it, but I'd rather be wrong overestimating Agatha Christie than under. But either way that it goes, I'm fine with it because this has been a roaring good time. But after really thinking about it, I decided maybe the twist of this book is that one of these people is somehow involved with Napoleon Cust. And I looked through them once again. No one's a war veteran. No one has any sign of being tied to him that I could spot personally, which made me somehow think of Inspector Chrome, because all of our victims so far have had some kind of horrible thing orbiting their life, whether it's the cancer of Sir Carmichael Clark's wife. We also had the abusive husband for Miss Asher, or as I called her, Miss Ashner. And we had Donald's fiery jealousy for Betty. Unfortunately, though, as much as I dug into it, I could not find anything that would make me think Inspector Crome would have some knowledge of all of this stuff. It makes no sense. Like, how could he as a cop be aware of the fact that Donald had a bit of a temper unless someone made a police report, but we haven't had a sign of that. And then the cancer connection is just completely absent. So then I started looking again at Miss Gray, the secretary for Sir Carmichael Clark. And I remembered the fact that Mary was also a servant, but for someone who's often not home. And I was thinking maybe somehow Mary, the niece of our first victim here, Asher, was possibly working with like the same employment agency, if that's how stuff worked back then. I'm not entirely sure. And that's how possibly Gray heard about the abusive husband. But she definitely knows about the cancer coming over here with Carmichael, but how could she possibly be aware of Donald? And that's where I ran out of gas there. She couldn't have known of that. So we're left with, really at the center of all of this, a profile that Agatha Christie has emphasized time and time again. And she said a few different points, because like women apparently don't write anonymous letters, which we, with the benefit of hindsight and time, know that isn't true. But within this book, it has been said to be a woman, possibly. And I don't know why, but my brain is latching onto that, because we've also had themes of retirement and getting older, and then also Hastings constantly flirting with Theodora Gray. So is it going to kind of come full circle and it be somehow Miss Gray exploiting a traumatized war veteran to enact these murders? The only way that's going to be true is if it does turn out that she did have an affair with Sir Carmichael Clark, which his brother denied with that letter, and a will was changed to then leave her a bunch of money. But again, there's been no inclination of that. No matter what the outcome is, I've had a really good ride. I kind of want it to be Crome, because Agatha Christie really made me successfully hate him. There's also just this big unanswered question of Donald being like, in my dreams, I murdered Mary. What was that, Donald? Why? Why? Could it be him? I don't think so. Would it be foreshadowing that it's somehow Mary? Because he says like, oh, it's her face. And so like, oh, it's the face of the killer being revealed to him in his dream after the murder is done. But that would make no sense. And Mary, I haven't spotted any connections here. So maybe it is truly just Bonaparte cussed. I really don't think so. There's something in me that's like, no, but I'm going to be real. Any theory I'm throwing out, I'm completely grasping at straws. I feel truly lost in this mystery, and I'm disappointed in myself, and I feel like I'm disappointing you, the viewer. That's my real thoughts and feelings at this point. Damn it. This is a hell of a murder mystery. Okay, let me get into why I'm elevating myself from an F to instead a D-, because I was right in the sense that Agatha Christie had a lot still up her sleeve, but I had absolutely no idea who did it or why, and I was entirely off base. Her red herrings herringed me. Let's go ahead and get into the answer of who exactly is the A.B.C. murderer. First off, though, I'm embarrassed I did not catch something. And y'all probably this whole video have been thinking, when's Daniel gonna say this very, very overt thing? And so I suffer from a condition called dyslexia. And it doesn't justify me missing this at all, but I'm going to hide behind this shield. I don't care how flimsy it is. And that is the fact that we are following the A.B.C. murderer. And the individual being positioned to take the fall for that name is Alexander Bonaparte Cust. A.B.C. Damn it! An unfortunate side effect of me making these videos and not knowing the end as I go through them is that every now and then, I'm not going to present you with important information that I should have because in the moment it just didn't catch me. It seemed irrelevant. Well, I'm going to rewind us back to the death of Sir Carmichael Clark. And I do enjoy the fact that I brought up the issue of his inheritance, because he does have a sickly wife who is not long for this world. And with the death of Sir Carmichael Clark, where will that inheritance go? Will it default to Miss Grey or to perhaps his brother, Franklin Clark, who's been around? Well, we didn't really talk a whole lot about Franklin Clark, but he seems to be a stand-up fellow, and I appreciate the fact that he did give that letter to Poirot that dissuaded him from thinking ill of this beautiful young woman who his brother did look at paternally. So on face value, there's just not really a whole lot suspicious there. It is important to know that Clark did travel a whole lot, but that just means he wasn't exactly around for these murders. No. We need to take an even closer look. At first, Alexander Bonaparte Cust, because as we've seen set up in this narrative, he is very quickly after this most recent murder taken down. We have his neighbors who have put together him being out of town for every single murder. And on top of that, he was seen soaked in blood and fleeing the area of a murder. And so with the neighbors coming forward and saying, hey, we think this guy is the killer, the police are able to quickly apprehend him. And when they search his apartment, not only do they find a typewriter that it turns out was used to send the letters for sure. And apparently they can even do tests to make sure it's exactly the right typewriter. And that is done here. I didn't know you could do that, but apparently I looked it up. You really can. Don't use a typewriter for murder, I guess. Well, actually, it would be a very good murder weapon. They're heavy, but don't use it to write letters. Don't write letters about your murder, actually. Let's just get that out of the way. Anyway, they also find stockings in his apartment, as well as A.B.C's, a small stockpile of them. It's not looking good for you, buddy. But there is an issue, because we're cutting back between Chrome's perspective, who, yes, has been around for a lot of these murders and does have some opportunities, possibly. He comes across the fact that, unfortunately, A.B.C., Alexander Bonaparte Cust, does have an alibi for one of the murders. In fact, it's a really solid alibi. He was with an individual playing dominoes all night that night, and the guy swears fervently it was that night and I was with Alexander the entire evening. That's a wrench. But we still have him cold for all these other reasons, so perhaps that guy just didn't know. But of course, Poirot does not like little unanswered tiddly bits happening in his cases. And on top of that, he also is saying, I'm not satisfied because I still don't know why did he do all of this? And so Poirot gets together our whole group again, and he starts asking them various questions. And quite frankly, most of these questions seem rather pointless. Then he gets to Theodora Grey, and he asks her, would you marry Sir Carmichael Clark? To which she says, no, I would not, indignantly. And that's when Poirot smiles and goes, that's all I needed to know. And then he goes out and begins touring all of the crime scenes. All of them. Oh, by the way that A.B.C. was actually arrested, they were aware it was him, but he went back to the first murder scene of Miss Asher and passed out in front of her store having an epileptic fit. And it is confirmed, we have all this going around revisiting the crime scenes and Hastings not sure what Poirot is up to, that A.B.C. does suffer from epileptic fits. He also squints all the time, kind of looking sinister, and he suffers from headaches. That's a murderer, you'd say, if you were a stereotyper. But after quite some time, Poirot comes back, and he gets to have a sit-down with Alexander Bonaparte Cust. And this is a big deal. The man who has been obsessively writing these mad letters to Poirot is finally going to get to have it out with this person he's been obsessed with, except it doesn't exactly go fireworky, and instead just kind of seems like Alexander needs help.
Do you know who I am? Alexander shook his head. No, I cannot say I do, unless you are Mr. Lucas. Or do they call it Junior? Or perhaps you come from Mr. Maynard. Maynard and Cole were the defending solicitors. His tone was polite, but not very interested. He seemed absorbed in some inner abstraction. I am Hercule Poirot. Poirot said the words very gently, and watched for the effect. Mr. Cuss raised his head a little. Oh, yes? He said it as natural as Inspector Crome might have said it, without the superciliousness. Then a minute later, he repeated his remark. Oh, yes, he said, and this time his tone was different, and held an awkward interest. He raised his head and looked at Poirot. Hercule Poirot met his gaze and nodded his own head gently once, twice. Yes, he said. I am the man who you wrote the letters. At once, the contact was broken. Mr. Cuss dropped his eyes and spoke irritably and fretfully. I never wrote to you. Those letters weren't written by me. I've said so again and again. I know, said Poirot. But if you did not write them, who did? An enemy. I must have an enemy. They are all against me. The police, everyone, all against me. It's a gigantic conspiracy theory. Poirot did not reply. Mr. Cuss said, Everyone's hand has been against me, always, even when you were a child? Mr. Cuss seemed to consider. No, not exactly then. My mother was very fond of me, but she was ambitious, terribly ambitious. That's why she gave me those ridiculous names. She had some absurd idea that I'd cut a figure in the world. She was always urging me to assert myself, talking about willpower, saying anyone could be master of his fate. She said I could do anything. He was silent for a minute. She was quite wrong, of course. I realized that myself quite soon. I wasn't the sort of person to get on in life. I was always doing foolish things, making myself look ridiculous, and I was timid, afraid of people. I had a bad time at school. The boys found out my Christian names. They used to tease me about them. I did very bad at school and games and work and everything. He shook his head. Just as well. Poor mother died. She'd have been disappointed even when I was at the commercial college. I was stupid. It took me longer to learn typing and shorthand than anyone else, and I didn't feel stupid, if you know what I mean. He cast a sudden appealing look to the other man. You know what I mean? I know what you mean, Poirot said. Go on. It was just the feeling that everybody else thought me stupid, very paralyzing. It was the same thing later in the office. And later still? In the war? Prompted Poirot. Mr. Cuss' face lightened up suddenly. You know, he said, I enjoyed the war. What I had of it, I felt for the first time a man like anybody else. We were all in the same box. I was as good as anyone else. His smile faded. And then I got that wound in my head, very slight, but they found out I had fits. I'd always known, of course, that there were times when I hadn't been quite sure what I was doing. Lapses, you know, and of course once or twice I'd fallen down, but I didn't really think they ought to have discharged me for that. No, I didn't think it was right. And afterwards? Poirot asked. I got a place as a clerk. Of course, there was good money to be got just then, and I didn't do so badly after the war, of course, a small salary, and I didn't seem to get on. I was being passed over for promotions. I wasn't go-ahead enough. It grew very difficult, really very difficult, especially when the slump came. To tell you the truth, I'd hardly got enough to keep body and soul together, and you've got to look presentable as a clerk. When I got the offer of this stocking job, salary and commission, Poirot said gently, but you are aware, are you not, that the firm who you say employed you denied the fact? Mr. Cuss got excited again. That's because they're in the conspiracy. They must be in the conspiracy, he went on. I've gotten written evidence. I've got their letters to me, giving me instructions as to what places to go to and lists of people to call on. Not written evidence, exactly. Typewritten evidence. It's the same thing. Naturally, a big firm of wholesale manufacturers typewrite their letters. Don't you know, Mr. Cuss, that a typewriter can be identified? All those letters were typed by one particular machine. And what of it? And that machine was your own? The one found in your room. No, it's all part of the plot against me, he added suddenly. Besides, their letters would be written on the same kind of machine. The same kind, but not the same actual machine. Mr. Cuss repeated obstinately, it's a plot! And the A.B.Cs that were found in your cupboard, I knew nothing about them. I thought they were stockings. Why did you tick off the name of Miss Ashler in the first list of people in Andover? Because I decided to start with her. One must begin somewhere. Yes, that is true. One must begin somewhere. I don't mean that, said Mr. Cuss. I don't mean what you mean. But you know what I meant. Mr. Cuss said nothing. He was trembling. I didn't do it, he said. I'm perfectly innocent.
The interview goes on, and to us, the reader, it even sounds like Poirot gets cussed to admit to the fact that he did the murders. But in greater context, he actually doesn't. And when he says he had to start with Miss Asher, he actually meant he needed to go back and start looking at the crime scenes, the murders, and figure out what actually happened. Hence why he was found passed out outside her place. He was trying to figure out the truth, and Poirot knows this and decides to gather everyone for a final time where he knows exactly who did it.
This is the denouement.
And no, it is not Alexander Bonaparte Cust.
My friend Hastings will tell you that from the first moment I received the first letter, I was upset and disturbed. It seemed to me at once that there was something very wrong about the letter. You were quite right, said Franklin Clark dryly. Yes, but there, at the very start, I made a grave error. I permitted my feeling, a very strong feeling about the letter, to remain a mere impression. I treated it as though it had been an intuition. In a well-balanced, reasoning mind, there is no such thing as an intuition. An inspired guess, you can guess, of course, and a guess is either right or wrong. If it is right, you call it an intuition. If it is wrong, you usually do not speak of it again. But what is often called an intuition is really an impression based on logical deduction or experience. When an expert feels that there is something wrong about a picture or a piece of furniture or the signature on a check, he is really basing that feeling on a host of small signs and details. He has no need to go into them minutely. His experience obviates that. The net result is the definite impression that something is wrong, but it is not a guess. It is an impression based on experience. A.B. and I admit that I did not regard the first letter in the way I should. It just made me extremely uneasy. The police regarded it as a hoax. I myself took it seriously. I was convinced that a murder would take place, and in Dover, as stated. As you know, a murder did take place.
And this brings Poirot back to a question he asked very early on in the investigation.
Why was I hired? Why would someone hire me?
Why not send the letter to the newspapers? Why not send the letters to the police? Why specifically me? Well, if you remember, there was a letter that was misdelivered repeatedly, and that caused them to, at the last minute, have to rush on down, and they were too late. The murder that mattered was Sir Carmichael Clark, and the killer had to be sure, absolutely sure, that the police would not be scurrying around the area, keeping an extra eye out on people who had C's in their last name. And so, if they just deliberately mess up the address, have the post delay it a few days, then it won't get there until the deed is done. And you can murder Sir Carmichael Clark on his walks he takes every evening that his close family are aware of, without any bother. And if you're a bit of a playboy who's known for traveling about a bunch, who can account for your whereabouts in the late hours when your brother goes on his lonesome walks? There's also the issue of, you saw that interview with Alexander Bonaparte Cust. Betty's belt was used to murder her. Does Alexander seem like the kind of guy who could get a beautiful, young, flirty woman to take off her belt and show it to him in a secluded beach? No. But the young playboy, Franklin Clark, seems certainly the kind. And finally, the most obvious, and this is a detail unfortunately I didn't mention at the time, Miss Asher actually had her name on her shop printed above it. Meaning if you're someone who's trying to set up these A.B.C. murders, you just go to that town, find the name, and go, oh, yep, there's my first distraction victim. Finally, this provides Poirot with his why. You see, an actual madman would come up with a greater pattern, a greater reason than just A.B.C. There would be some logic, something deeper. Not just, well, her name's printed above the door, and this waitress name starts with B. They were easy victims. They were the low-hanging fruit for someone who needed a distraction. That's the why. A lonely old woman who printed her name above the door, and a flirty waitress who's a bit of a flooze. And this is why that question earlier that was actually asked to Theodora Gray was so important, because when she indignantly upsettedly said, "No, I would not marry him." That actually gave a greater answer, because Poirot was good at detecting when maybe doth protest too much, and he also can see that when he asked that question, Franklin got a little upset too, because maybe he feared that his brother would actually end up leaving his money to this woman, maybe even falling in love with this woman. But you can't stop at your brother. You can't go A.B.C. done, because then maybe people will realize that's the murder that matters. And so you need to haphazardly, while everyone is in this town looking for a potential killer, find an opening when you're alone and go away from the racetracks you're supposed to be at and go into a movie theater. Just stab somebody. There's probably someone in the theater with a D name, and the police will assume, because it's dark, you stabbed the wrong person. And that's actually what happened here, because it turns out the person stabbed in the movie theater had a name that
started with
E, not D. But of course, this leaves the ever so gaping question, well then what the hell is Alexander Bonaparte Cuss doing so implicated in all of this, and even fleeing a scene of a crime covered in blood? Well, Poirot explains it all quite well.
What? Clark looked really startled. "Oh yes," Clark said gently. "I had no sooner spoken to him than I was aware that Cust believed himself to be guilty. And even that didn't satisfy you, Poirot," said Clark. "No, because as soon as I saw him, I also knew that he could not be guilty. He has neither the nerve nor the daring, nor, may I add, the brains to plan. All along, I have been aware of the dual personality of the murderer. Now I see wherein it consisted. Two people were involved. The real murderer, cunning, resourceful, and daring, and the pseudo-murderer, stupid, facilitating, and suggestible. Suggestible, it is in that word that the mystery of Mr. Gust consists. It was not enough for you, Mr. Clark, to devise this plan of a series to distract attention from a single crime. You had also to have a stalking horse. I think the idea first originated in your mind as a result of a chance encounter in a city cafe den with this odd personality, with this bombastic Christian names. You were at the right time turning over in your mind various plans for the murder of your brother. Really? And why? Because you were seriously alarmed for the future. I do not know whether you realize it, Mr. Clark, but you played into my hands when you showed me a certain letter written by your brother. In it, he displayed very clearly his affection and absorption for Miss Theo Gray. His regard may have been a paternal one, or he may have preferred to think it so. Nevertheless, there was a very real danger that on the death of your sister-in-law, in his loneliness, turned to his beautiful girl for sympathy and comfort, and might end, as so often happens with elderly men, in his marrying her. Your fear was increased with your knowledge of Miss Gray. You are, I fancy, an excellent, if somewhat cynical judge of character. You judge, whether correctly or not, that Miss Gray was the type of woman on the make. You had no doubt that she would jump at the chance of becoming Lady Clark. Your brother was an extremely healthy and vigorous man. There might be children, and your chance of inheriting your brother's wealth would vanish. You have been, I fancy, in essence, a disappointed man all your life. You have been the Rolling Stone, and you have gathered very little moss. You were bitterly jealous of your brother's wealth. I repeat then that turning over various schemes in your mind, your meeting Mr. Cust gave you an idea. His bombastic Christian names, his account of his epileptic seizures, and of his headaches. His whole shrinking and insignificant personality struck you as fitting him for the tool you wanted. Your arrangements were excellent. In Cust's name you wrote for large consignments of hosiery to be sent to him. You yourself sent a number of ABCs, looking like a small parcel. You wrote to him a typed letter purporting to be from the same firm, offering him a good salary and commission. Your plans were so well laid beforehand that you typed all the letters that were sent subsequently, and then presented him with the machine on which they had been typed. You had now to look about for two victims whose names began with A and B, respectively, and who lived at places also beginning with those same letters. You hit on in Dover a quite likely spot, and your preliminary reconnaissance there led you to select Miss Asher's shop as the scene of the first crime. Her name was written clearly over the door, and you found by experiment that she was usually alone in the shop. Her murder needed nerve, daring, and reasonable luck. For the letter B, you had to vary your tactics. Lonely women in shops might conceivably have been warned. I should imagine that you frequented new cafes and tea shops, laughing and joking with the girls there, finding out whose name began with the right letter, and who would be suitable for your purpose. In Betty Bernard, you found just the type of girl you were looking for. You took her out once or twice, explaining to her that you are a married man, and that outings must therefore take place in somewhat hole-in-the-corner manner. Then, your preliminary plans complete, you set to work. You sent the Andover list to Cust, directing him to go there on a certain date, and sent off the A.B.C. letter to me. On the appointed day, you went to Andover and killed Miss Ashner, without anything occurring to damage your plans. Murder number 1 was successfully accomplished. For the second murder, you took the precaution of committing it in reality the day before. I am fairly certain that Betty Bernard was killed well before midnight on the 24th of July. We now come to murder number 3, the important, in fact, the real murder from your point of view. And here, a full meed of praise is due to Hastings, who made a simple and obvious remark to which no attention was paid. He suggested that the third letter went astray intentionally. In that one simple fact lies the answer to the question that has puzzled me so long. Why were the letters addressed in the first place to Hercule Poirot, a private detective, and not so to the police? Erroneously, I imagine some personal reason. Not at all. The letters were sent to me because the essence of your plan was that one of them should go wrongly addressed and go astray. But you cannot arrange for a letter addressed to a criminal investigation department of Scotland Yard to go astray. It is necessary to have a private address. You choose me as a fairly well-known person and a person who was sure to take the letters to the police. And also, in your rather insular mind, you enjoyed scoring off a foreigner. You addressed your envelope very clearly. Whitehaven, White Horse. Quite a natural slip. Only Hastings was sufficiently perspicacious to disregard subtleties and go straight for the obvious. Of course the letter was meant to go astray. The police were to be set on the trail only when the murder was safely over. Your brother's nightly walk provided you with the opportunity. And so successfully had the A.B.C. terror taken hold of the public mind that the possibility of your guilt never occurred to anyone. After the death of your brother, of course, your object was accomplished. You had no wish to commit any more murders. On the other hand, if the murder stopped without reason, a suspicion of the truth might come to someone. Your stalking horse, Mr. Cuss, has so successfully lived up to his role of the invisible but insignificant man that so far no one had noticed that the same person had been in the vicinity of the 3 murders. To your annoyance, even his visit to Comside had not been mentioned. The matter had passed completely out of Miss Gray's head. Always daring, you decided one more murder must take place, but this time the trail must be well blazed. You selected Doncaster for the scene of the operations. Your plan was very simple. You yourself would be on the scene in the nature of things. Mr. Cuss would be ordered to Doncaster by his firm. Your plan was to follow him round and trust to opportunity. Everything fell out well. Mr. Cuss went to the cinema. That was simplicity itself. You sat a few seats away from him. When he got up to go, you did the same. You pretended to stumble, leaned over, and stabbed the dozing man in the row of front. You slid the A.B.C. onto his knees and managed to collide heavily with Mr. Cuss in the darkened doorway, wiping the knife on his sleeve and slipping it into his pocket. You were not in the least at pains to choose a victim whose name began with D. Anyone would do. You assumed, and quite rightly, that would be considered to be a mistake. There was sure to be someone whose name began with D not far off in the audience. It would be assumed he had been intended to be the victim.
And as we have seen before, Agatha Christie is not afraid to reach a little bit. Have a dramatic, okay, yeah, sure, I'll believe that for this narrative to work, but all of it comes together in a way that I find to be really cool. And I wish I had more clearly conveyed Clark's character earlier. I just didn't know this was going to be the reveal, so I couldn't, and I can't really fake it. But of course, Franklin Clark denies all of this and says absolutely not. Poirot replies to that by saying, well, we did find one of your fingerprints on the typewriter that was in the possession of Alexander Bonaparte Cust. To which Franklin Clark pulls out a gun and tries to demonetize my video. Except his gun's unloaded because apparently Poirot had one of his friends who's a professional thief come in, take the gun from his pocket, unload it, and put it back in. And then 2 cops come in from Scotland Yard, arrest Franklin and take him out. And so the A.B.C. murders end with Alexander Bonaparte Cust, our exploited veteran who is legitimately suffering from medical conditions and lapses in memory, coming to see Poirot, who is well aware of the fact that this guy has just been taken for a hell of a ride with false employment and so much just worsening his condition. And so, of course, our detective extends him nothing but sympathy. And also, once Cust mentions the fact that there are papers offering him £100 for his story and all of this, Poirot says, no, 500, and make sure it's not exclusive so you can sell it again and again. You deserve this. You're the most famous man in England. And god damn! Oh, couple more things. We also have after Clark is taken off and arrested, it turns out that they didn't find a fingerprint on the typewriter. That was just Poirot f***ing with him to make sure that he would think he's completely screwed and flat out admit to it and be like, well, in for a penny, in for a pound. Ha ha! Oh, my gun just misfired like his did. What the? But the final lines between friends reads,
Mr. Cuss shook him warmly by the hand. You're a very good man, Mr. Poirot. Poirot, as usual, did not disdain the compliment. He did not even succeed in looking modest. When Mr. Cuss had strutted importantly out, my old friend smiled across to me. So, Hastings, we went hunting once more, did we not? Vive le sport.
That's an outstanding detective story. Hot damn. I'm going to go ahead and admit I kind of get an F there. I had no idea it was going to be Clark in hindsight. I should have picked up on a few things. The woman thing just really got me. This was absolutely Agatha Christie's best written novel and her most interesting cast of characters, and the kind of atmosphere, building pressure from the public eye and all of that smartly woven in really does actually affect the reader and the pressure felt on this case. This is my first exposure to Hastings and Poirot together. Adore their dynamic. What a wonderful duo. This kind of hunky-dory Hastings guy going about, occasionally stating the obvious to inspire Poirot to do his flamboyant is just great. I love that they're just good, weird friends, overtly weird in the text. They are odd individuals to the point where the cops even make comments about it. And surprisingly, this sending Alexander Bonaparte Cust to these locations to be set up for this as a salesman for stockings for a company that doesn't even really exist checks out pretty damn well. I think if I really paid attention and took like a magnifying glass to it, I could find plot holes. No murder mystery story is perfect, but this one, for how ambitious it is. So yes, when I did put up this board and went over everything, I did kind of low-key give you all a little bit of a sign where if you were able to put it together, I mentioned the will and the fact that she's a sick, terminally ill wife, leading to the next question of who's the natural successor. Of course, Franklin Clark. Gave you a little bit of a hint there. Hope it wasn't too obvious. Having some fun. Where would I rank this in my Agatha Christie trilogy? I think it's my new number one. I actually think I enjoyed the reading experience of this the most. I think I enjoy the concept of the murder of Roger Ackroyd the most. And what I would think is the most impressive, just because of its execution, would be And Then There Were None. It's kind of they're all on the Mount Rushmore. Like, they all are very impressive in their own right. This was just the best showcasing, in my subjective opinion, of Agatha Christie's talent as an author. But let me know what you thought of this one in the comments down below. Like and subscribe and comment what murder mystery book I should try and solve next. If you all demand it's Agatha Christie, I'll absolutely do that. I'm having a wonderful time. But if you have a non-Agatha Christie murder mystery, I want to go ahead and, pivot a little bit here, and I'm open to any and all suggestions. I have not had Death in the River Nile, I think it's called, spoiled for me, and I know a lot of people want me to do that one. Just remember, I have had Murder on the Orient Express spoiled for me. Thank you again. If you want to see more of my face after all this, I just released a Red Rising mega summary, and of course we have 2 other Agatha Christie solve-alongs. Now, go keep being good people. I love y'all. Peace.